Your dad must have had a wonderful connection with Sam because of Sam's Western heritage.
It's like Christmas ornaments on the tree. The cast they put around Steve McQueen is brilliant.
Neither me or my bull aim to make a living off another fella's pride. Now, you might as well face it. You're just not the rider you was a few years back.
I need it, Buck. It's my hometown.
Hi, I'm Rob Word. Welcome to A Word on Westerns. I know all of you have seen Junior Bonner with Steve McQueen in one of his finest performances. You've seen I Will Fight No More Forever. You've seen The Virginian. You may have even seen some episodes written by Jeb Rosebrook. He wrote all of those that I've mentioned. His son is a writer also and grew up watching his dad become the legend that he is. Is that right, Stuart?
Oh, that's right. Growing up in North Hollywood, California.
Okay.
Grew up there in the backyard, the studios there, Republic and Ventura Boulevard. And just my dad taught me all about the Western movies and growing up in Los Angeles, and greatly admire my dad's work, his perseverance to become a professional writer there in Hollywood. It really is it's a dream of his, and we're all really proud of what he did and how he pursued his craft. He loved writing. Well, I was born in Santa Monica, and mom and dad bought a house in North Hollywood in 1964.
Wow.
And we lived there. It was our childhood home, and we lived there until they sold it in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So grew up there in the valley. And
by Republic Studios.
Yeah, not too far from there. And my dad's offices were down on Ventura Boulevard, just downstairs from Earl Hamner, who was a real mentor to him growing up. And my dad ended up doing a lot of work on the Waltons because of his friendship with Earl. And Earl made a lot of connections for my dad when he decided to pursue his craft of writing and television.
So he had short stories or articles that were published before The Virginian, which I have as his first Western.
Correct. What he was starting to do was, as you know, in the pitch and the story side of television writing was many times you sold the story first. In the old style, before you wrote the full screenplay, you wrote a story. And so he started getting his stories published in magazines and started writing stories that could be developed into scripts. Mm-hmm. And that's how Earl Hamner gave him a connection at Universal, and he had a story that he pitched, and that called The Bugler, and that led to his first credit at Universal.
Was that a story that he came up with on his own, and then they said, write the screenplay?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about The Bugler that's anecdotal to the Virginian history is when it was supposed to air, it was his first credit to air, there was a moon landing or a moon launch, and it was never aired until the Western Channel picked up The Virginian.
Really?
The first time anybody ever saw it. And then, as he had a script optioned by James Coburn called Warcraft, but then he went back into Universal. His agent thought he had a great deal there, and they're like, well, Jeb, if you want to write for us, we don't have a salary right now. You can come and we'll give you a desk and you can write stories to pitch to different producers of Westerns. But Dad was it was kind of a struggle at that time. So
the Bugler, that episode, it has our friend Morgan Woodward as this mean colonel whose son, Michael Burns, I think, is the Bugler, who he's mistreating and is very strict with. A wonderful story. How interesting that it never aired.
Right. It's one of those, it's kind of like the Heidi episode. Earl Hamner wrote Heidi, and I believe it was involved with a playoff game where...
Well, they kept Heidi on, and then the game flipped.
Right.
And the other team won.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, in those days of television, we have no idea if it had aired where my dad's career would have gone. Maybe it would, he would have people would have seen it, and he would have been doing more episodic television there. But at that point, he continued to concentrate on selling screenplays for the movies.
Well, his next big screenplay was Junior Bonner.
That's correct.
Did that start as a short story?
It did.
Steve McQueen as Junior Bonner, the last of his kind.
The story behind it was Coburn had, Dad had a script called Wardcraft. Paul Michel was connected as the producer. James Coburn had given my dad an advance on the script. And we really thought it was going to go to production. I think Jason Robards was connected with it. Jason Robards had a big accident out in Malibu, so there was going to be a delay. So things were getting pretty tight at the Rosebrook household, as I've been told. And
how old were you then?
1970, I was 7. So 70, I was 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So that summer, I was up at the Orm Ranch for part of the summer. My dad was visiting my grandmother with my sister and mom in Phoenix. And a friend called up and said, "Hey, Jeb, we need to go up to Prescott for the rodeo." This is the true story, origin of Junior Bonner. So they drove up to Prescott on the 4th of July to go to the rodeo and go down to Whiskey Row and the Palace. And as they drove into Prescott, my dad started seeing these mobile home develop in a new country club out in the prairie of Prescott Valley, Lonesome Valley, that he'd grown up seeing. Them was just giant ranches. Mm-hmm. So he got to the rodeo, went home, and was inspired. His word craft story was about land and family and loss, dysfunction. And so and this was more familiar. This was close to him because this is very close to the Orm Ranch where he grew up, just outside of Prescott. So.
And you live in Prescott now.
I live in Prescott now. It's like really coming home to our adopted hometown of Prescott. So around Labor Day, as you know, in Hollywood, Labor Day really relaunches a new cycle in the business. So Mike Wise calls up my dad, his agent, calls him up and says, "Robert Redford is looking for a rodeo script. He's put the word out to all the agencies. He wants a rodeo script." This is September 1970. He said, "Jeb, if there's anybody who has a rodeo story, it's you." He goes, "Well, I just so happen to have written one called Bonner." So he delivers Bonner to Mike Wise, and it's delivered out to CAA and William Morris, and it's put out there. And Joe Wazan, who's about to produce Jeremiah Johnson, reads it. Mm-hmm. Joe Wazan calls up my dad, meets with him and Mike Wise, and they make a deal. He says, "Jeb, I'm going to Utah to film Jeremiah Johnson. You're going to send me the pages. We're going to do this story. We're going to turn it into a script. Mm-hmm. So you write the pages. I'll send you back notes while I'm making the film, and we'll have a script by December." And that's when the call came in from Joe Wazan to my mom and said, "Where's Jeb? I don't have a car. We have a meeting with Steve McQueen tonight. Can he pick me up?" My dad's like, "I'm the struggling writer, and the producer doesn't have a car, so I'm going to pick him up in the family station wagon and drive up to Steve McQueen's house." And they went up to McQueen's house. The kids are there. Nellie's there. And my dad is having a meeting with Joe and Steve. Steve's like, "I've got notes, this and this, and we should do this." And then he turns to Joe and says, Jeb's not taking any notes, which my dad wasn't. And he was, so excited to be there with McQueen and the highest paid movie star in the world. And Joe, really, who was a poker player, quickly says, "Don't worry, Jeb has a great memory. He doesn't need to take notes."
And it's just because your dad was like so in awe.
Yes, just, and taking it all in the moment. And McQueen signed on right away. And, the interesting thing is that Steve McQueen is noted and he's quoted as that it was one of the best scripts, one of his favorite films that he ever made. It was a real bridge in his life.
He was so good in that, and he showed a side of him that people expected with Steve and with Peckinpah a lot of action, which it wasn't. It was a wonderful family story. Ida Lupino and Robert Preston should have gotten Oscar nominations for that. Boy, they were good. And the whole relationship with Joe Don Baker.
Right.
Come on, work with me. We're going to level some land, build houses. And
that's right. And so it was very serendipitous. And Joe Wazan was such he was really at the top of his game. Mm-hmm. And, what's interesting is you look back and you go, well, how old was everybody at that time? And McQueen was just about 40, maybe. And my dad and Joe were 5 years younger. Mm-hmm. And then the next person they hired on the deal was Sam Peckinpah. Mm-hmm. So Joe knew that Sam and Steve had a great creative relationship, even if it was a little fractured from the Cincinnati kid. Mm-hmm. Sam signed on right away. He tested my dad. These anecdotes that my dad wrote about in his memoir was that, so they had a great meeting with Steve. Now they have Steve signed. Solar Productions is on board. Mm-hmm. And Joe takes a meeting with Sam and my dad. Sam has the script and calls them up, and they're editing Straw Dogs. And they're editing some of the most violent, dramatic scenes of that film. in many ways, Sam was testing my dad, especially, and Joe. Are you going to handle watching this rape scene as I'm editing, as they walk in and then, take a break? And, you want to see what I'm doing, working on? And nobody flinched. And Sam said, I like the script. I want to do it. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I believe, February of 1971.
Did Sam have much input in changing it, or did he just say, I'm going to shoot it like it is?
Well, that was the interesting thing. He was still working on Straw Dogs. And once Joe had Sam and Steve signed on, with Solar, and Sam wanted a piece of the picture as well. Mm-hmm. ABC Productions. It was one of the last two films that ABC produced before leaving the film business. Mm-hmm. Cabaret was their other film that year. Pretty interesting.
So they had one that made money and one that didn't.
Right. And one that won a lot of Oscars, but they were both big star power films. And so they went out pretty well. Mm-hmm. And I'll say that there's probably as many people still watching Junior Bonner or more than they are Cabaret.
I would agree with that. At least our audience, right? Everybody out there is watching Junior Bonner.
Right. And
read the book. And this is a great story Jeb's telling. Don't mean to interrupt. I don't want to change the flow, but he has a book all about this too that you might want to pick up.
A very honest book called Junior Bonner, The Making of a Classic in the Summer of 1971 with Steve McQueen and Sam Peckinpah.
So why do you think it failed?
Two reasons, and one of the reasons was both Sam and Steve as businessmen, they both really knew the business. They were pros. They went to ABC and said it should not be a general release. It should be a short release, small art films that's in New York and Los Angeles.
To build up the word of mouth and get some reviews.
Exactly. And ABC they knew that they were having success with Cabaret. And that's their big youth movement in television and rock and roll and music. And they said, we're going to do general release. And the other thing that happened that we look back on, as I've done my research with my dad on this, is that Robert Redford was a power to be reckoned with in Hollywood. He didn't make a rodeo film until 1979 called Electric Horseman, mm-hmm. in which there are outtakes from Junior Bonner in the rodeo scene, which is very ironic. But that summer, you also have Honkers.
Mm-hmm. James Coburn and Steve Einat.
Right. You've got When the Legend
When the Legends Die, the Frederick Forrest, Richard Woodmark.
Correct. And J.W. Coop.
Yes, that Cliff Robertson directed.
Correct.
That was his favorite film.
Right. All three of those. And there's a black rodeo movie that comes out.
Woody Strode narrates.
Comes out that summer. Correct. Those all come out that summer.
Yeah. And none of them do business.
Correct. But they all come out that summer. Mm-hmm. And I also, if you want to place all of those films in film history, you think about Sugarland Express a couple years later with Steven Spielberg. It's part of that era of realism when filmmakers are still allowed to go into the heartland, leave the coast. You got The French Connection, The Godfather, Clute, all these heavy-duty coast urban films. But directors are still interested in what's happening in the heartland of America. I want to go film there, all on location, film with the real light, the real local casting. And so Junior Bonner is part of that long.
And it, I think, was the best of those rodeo films.
Steve McQueen as Junior Bonner. He has only one problem: the 20th century.
Boys, times have changed.
You ought to take up another line of work.
Yeah, I'm working on my first million. You're still working on 8 seconds. Rodeo time.
Your dad must have had a wonderful connection with Sam because of Sam's Western heritage.
Most definitely. And there's a lot of serendipity that happens very quickly in how it goes from McQueen and Sam. ABC is signed on. Then they get Ben Johnson, who's up for an Academy Award nomination, or just been awarded.
Just won one for Last Picture Show.
Last Picture Show. And Robert Preston and Ida Lupino sign on. You get Dub Taylor, Joe Don Baker.
Was he great?
You're just some kind of motel cowboy.
And he was a Solar production. This is a little insight that I think is interesting, is that Steve production company had some say in the casting. And rather than taking a full $1 million, he took $800 with $200 on the back end. I mean, he was $1 million actor. He was the highest paid actor in the world. With a $3.65 million budget, between Sam and Steve, they had $1.5 million up front. Right. And so then you have Lynn Stallworth was the casting director, and they it's like Christmas ornaments on the tree. The cast they put around Steve McQueen is brilliant. And it's Robert Preston and Ida Lupino's comeback. They then both go on to return to a big acting here, especially Preston. But and then Dub Taylor is the bartender, and you have Bill McKinney as the rival of Steve McQueen, and Don Red Berry.
Who was the DP?
Lucian Ballard.
Ah, beautiful.
And Lucian Ballard. And the other thing that happens is Sam is fully back from England. They're still editing. He actually brings over his editing team. They're finishing the film in the Prescottonian Hotel. And the script is sent to Pratt, is his last name. It was the executive ABC. He sends the script to the Film Commission, which sends it up to Bill Pierce. Bill Pierce is 87 years old, still lives at Prescott. And Bill Pierce knew everybody. And he had been the location manager for Billy Jack. And he was also the chairman of the rodeo.
Were you there on location too?
I came on location with my mom and sister for part of the filmmaking.
Well, because the 4th of July parade, that was really happening, and they shot as it was going on. And so Steve was in that parade.
That's
year.
right. I was in the parade that year, but it's not guaranteed that they could make the deal or Sam was going to be impressed with the location. So they were already talking to Ruidoso, which I believe is where they made Honkers with James Coburn. They went to New Mexico with Slim Pickens. But they, it's late May, early June, and Sam and Katie Haber and my dad and Joe Wazan all go up to Prescott. And Bill Pierce has the script, and they meet at the Prescottonian, and Bill Pierce tells the story very well. They knock on the door, and there's a bunch of people standing around in the room, and Sam is drinking Martell brandy, and nobody's saying a thing. And Bill Pierce looked around the room, and he said, well, if you guys are standing around and not doing anything, I've got lots to do. And Sam sits up and says, I'm going with that guy right now, and the rest of you sons of bitches can follow me. And off they went. And Bill had the locations dialed in from front to back. And by the end of the day, Sam said, Jeb, you're not going to dinner with the mayor. You've got notes from me, and you're going to type those notes up. And the fact is Sam had my dad on set the whole summer. And he and Steve and Sam and Joe and Haida, everyone worked together the whole summer together. And Dad was on set the whole summer and was doing notes every night. And so it was a very collaborative immersion of the film crew in Prescott. They had about 3 weeks to prepare, and Bill Pierce opened every single door. There was only one location they had to pay for all summer. And then I also learned recently, because Bill was the chair of the rodeo, there's a very well-known family in Prescott, the Keykeeper family. And John and Linda Keykeeper, Linda was the rodeo secretary. And when I learned nothing happens at a rodeo without the rodeo secretary. And John and Linda had deep roots going way back in rodeo. And Linda's father is Chuck Shepard is in the Rodeo Hall of Fame. And they told me recently that they got a call from Casey Tibbs. Casey Tibbs, the national champion, the great rodeo rider. And Casey was going to be the rodeo
coordinator, wasn't he?
Yes, he was the rodeo coordinator. And he's the Babe Ruth of rodeo, right?
Sure.
So Casey called Chuck Shepard and John and Linda and said, hey, I got this deal here in Hollywood. We need to make this rodeo picture. Can you help me make it happen? And the Keykeepers donated. They said yes.
There never was a horse that couldn't be rode. There never was a cowboy that couldn't be throwed.
Famous old saying, right?
The 4th of July parade that's in the film Junior Bonner, that really took place.
They had 3 weeks to prepare, bring the whole crew over from Los Angeles, cast locally, and work with the rodeo committee and the Prescott Frontier Days JCs on corresponding how they could get the crew into the parade. And so Bill Pierce, the location manager, was able to open all the doors downtown. He was the rodeo chair that year for the JCs. I think they had 5 to 9 cameras up on the rooftops of the buildings, plus the camera car following the Curly Bonner float. Curly Bonner was played by Joe Don Baker. And then they had to get Preston into the parade. And McQueen, of course, famously comes up walking in the parade and jumping on the horse with Preston. They had to work with the local electrical company to have electrical lines brought down when the stuntman rode off, and then Steve and Preston ride off, and then the stuntmen replace them, and they fall off their horse, and they have to bring the camera car through the neighborhood with the power lines down. And so it was an amazing choreography to shoot the largest rodeo parade in the state live with the principal actors and their floats and their participation in the parade.
Did it delay the parade at all?
Not at all. The film company had to fit with the parade schedule, just as the film company had to fit with the rodeo that week. The world's oldest rodeo in those days, I believe, was 3 days. And they had to coordinate with the rodeo secretary, Linda Keykeeper, the organization of all entrants from the film company. And they used stuntmen and actors, McQueen, his roles, and Don Redberry. But then they had to substitute stuntmen, and according to the PRCA, they had to enter the rodeo. So they had to be numbered participants in the rodeo. So if you look at the day sheets, you will see the name of any of the stuntmen who were riding for the rodeo.
Steve McQueen as Junior Bonner.
Did Steve ever get on a bull?
They had a tame bull. They had a doubles for the two bulls. They had a wild bull that the stuntman rode, and then they had a tame bull that he sat on when he went into the chute. Now that tame bull, famously, Bill Pierce said his daughter rode around the rodeo grounds the whole time that's how tame that bull was. And then they actually had a closed set when they had a mechanical bull for Steve to sit on, and no one from the outside was allowed in the arena when they did mechanical bull
So
shots.
they dragged the mechanical bull into the arena
Right.
with electric wires and everything, and then he got on that.
Right.
They shot it.
And shot some mechanical bull scenes with him. And then they had a tame bull. They would bring in the hot bull, snorting and everything like that for the shots of the bull coming into the chutes. Then they had tame bull. And so there's a backstory on the fact that they had to shoot the rodeo live. And then, as it does many years, it rained over the 4th of July. It rained on, I think, maybe the third day of maybe on the 4th of July of the rodeo. So the next week, the rodeo's over and the races come back, but they had to do all their pickups, and they had to do all the close-ups and do all the everything to, flush out all the rodeo scenes. So Bill Pierce was asked by Sam. He says, "I can't match anything. The ground is too wet. Yeah, how can I do this? Do you have can anyone get any dust?" And he said, "I know somebody." So he called a local guy near where they shot the destruction of the homestead. A guy named was Archie. And he called him up and he said, "I don't have any dust." "Sure you do, Archie. You got all that dust underneath your gravel pit. Bring that." And so he brought 3 trucks of gravel dust over to the arena. And when he arrived, Bill Pierce says, he said, "Where do you want it?" And he says, "Dump it as close as you can to the guy over there in the lawn chair and the umbrella without killing him." And so then Sam came over to Bill and put his arm around him, according to Bill Pierce, and said, "You know what? I've filmed all around the world, and I've asked for dust many times, but no one's ever supplied it." And Bill said, "Well, you've never been to Prescott, Arizona in the summertime." So they were able to do they got that dust into the rodeo arena, and they were able to do all the matches, and it worked out really well.
Well, everybody must have loved having that shoot there, too.
It was.
The saloon is such an iconic location still. I've been there multiple times.
Right.
There's that big 24 sheet from Junior Bonner plastered on that one wall, and all the posters from the films.
Yep.
That's still...
The Palace Restaurant and Saloon. And at the time, Shell Dunbar was the owner, and Shell loaned the Palace to the film company for free. At the end of the movie, great publicity, the film company gave him Steve McQueen's Cadillac as a gift and thanks for allowing them to film in the Palace. And the Palace is the oldest operating saloon in the state of Arizona.
Didn't it used to be not just Whiskey Row, but a lot of prostitution going on there in Prescott?
Yeah, it is a territorial, rough and tumble city, and it had a great reputation for, if you want to call it a great reputation. Prescott was a Wild West town, and it definitely had in its heyday gambling and brothels, and Whiskey Row is very famous on Montezuma there. And the Palace now is thriving, and Matt's Saloon next door is where all the grips hung out during the making of the movie, and it's still, we celebrate our Western heritage in Prescott every day.
Well, as young as you were, did you witness some of these incidents that you're talking about?
Well, I came into town for part of the production. My mom and sister were there. My sister's younger than me. And we went down to the plaza across from the house. We saw a lot of filmmaking right around the plaza, but I wasn't there for the filmmaking. My dad didn't really he was very intently working. This was his first big movie with Sam and Steve and Lucian Ballard and Joe Wazan and the crew and the script. And so we stayed at the Prescottonian with my mom, where everybody else was staying. And so, like, Dub Taylor took me out for some Jeep rides while I was there. So I'm sure, we went into the Palace. Maybe they were doing some blocking out some sets, and then Mom took us off to somewhere else where they were filming. My dad got really bruised up. He was an extra in the fight scene, and he was also an extra in the wild cow milking. And he got an honorary stuntman buckle for his participation as an honorary stuntman.
The post-production aspect of it, because you said your dad was there all the time during the shooting, was he involved with Sam in post-production?
He was. And, they had to do all the wild lines and everything they had to do to update any sound of the dialogue they had to work on. And then he was also there when they did the recording of Arizona Morning and Rodeo Man with Rod Hart. And Alex Taylor also sang an opening song that wasn't used at the time, but is now the opening credit song of the film. And there's really not sure exactly what happened. There are probably some legal things, but Rod Hart was with the Bob Cox band, was the house band at the Palace, and and he has the credit for the lyrics and the music for Arizona Mornings.
But in the Blu-ray and the restoration, Alex Taylor his song is back in the film.
Yeah, starting sometime in the early 80s. There's a backstory on the music in that Dunhill Records was bought by ABC about 1970-71. And, ABC was going through that big youth movement on music and television.
And they wanted to push Alex Taylor.
Yeah, they hired a very famous songwriting duo that wrote this song. And then it was picked by Alex Taylor, who was signed with Dunhill Records and was on the ABC. But there was some controversy on when he recorded the song. And Sam and Joe and my dad and Jerry Fielding preferred the songs that Rod Hart recorded for them. And so that's why Arizona Morning was the lead song. So a lot of people really prefer the Rod Hart song.
Once the film was over and Sam was always involved in what his next project might be, was your dad part of that inner circle of group that hung out with Sam?
They stayed in contact. And actually, he wrote another script for Joe and Sam and Steve, a Western. And I've gone back and read a big interview with Sam in Rolling Stone magazine right after that when they're making The Getaway. And he said, I've got 6 pictures lined up. I've got Max Evans, and I got another Western, and I got, I think he was already thinking about Pecker and Billy the Kid. My dad and Sam always remained friends for the rest of his life. And he introduced Max Evans to my dad, which began a lifelong friendship.
Well, tell us a little bit about Max Evans. I mean, I know he's a great writer and rock on tour, and his book, The Rounders, was turned into a wonderful movie with Henry Fonda and Glenn Ford that Burt Kennedy directed.
Right, that's right. Well, Sam really felt that Max and my dad would become simpatico, and Max had a script called Xavier's Folly that he thought my dad could help Max with. And so they met a lot about trying to get that script made. And then they had a great friendship in terms of writing and mutual admiration as writers. And so Max was always a connection between my dad and Sam. And I think they all hoped, that they were going to be doing a lot more work together. Sam had a number of Max's books, more than a number, optioned. And my dad was right there in the middle, working with them on different projects, or, especially that one Western that they were hoping to make, Jack Ballard.
You and your family were still living in L.A., but Max was in Arizona, wasn't he?
New Mexico. He lived in Albuquerque. But he would come over for meetings with Sam, and he came to our house many times, like Casey Tibbs did after getting to know Casey on Junior Bonner. And they loved my mom's home cooking. So Max would come over for dinner, and And then my dad and Max would have meetings, and then Casey Tibbs would come over regularly, and he'd take my sister and I on horseback riding. So, and we got to meet Ben Johnson a couple of times, and some of the benefits of being of what happened with Junior Bonner was this extended family that came out of the movie, and Casey and Max were two that we really became really close with.
What dish of your mom's did they really like?
I think they like their meatloaf and his mashed potatoes, and just something down home.
Yeah.
2 children, family dinner, and so my mom set a real table, it was a real open table for all the Fielder Cook used to come to our house regularly, and so there was a lot of dreamers and writers and directors and producers and writers that came to our house.
Well, I know your dad probably is proud of you for helping work on the book about the making of Junior Bonner that you did. What was the response to that?
It's been a really positive response, and it's probably one of the most honest books about a writer and a writer's life in Hollywood. And I had talked to him for years about trying to write a memoir. But my dad was always writing ahead, and he wasn't looking back. He was writing. He's a working writer. But when he sat down to write that this last year of his life, we had just done with Mike Siegel the documentary that's with the re-release of Junior Bonner. There's a great print that was put out in 2017.
I have it.
With a nice documentary. And it was soon after that where my dad really started sitting down to write about Junior Bonner and the summer of 71. But he really used it as an opportunity to talk about what the kind of the hard knocks it takes, and the ups and downs of becoming a new writer in Hollywood in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I really recommend it to a lot of people, not because it's just my dad, but it'll give us a great insight to people about what it takes to become a writer in Hollywood, and a real honest look. And I would say that if people look back and watch Junior Bonner, listen to a voice of a writer who needs a win in his adopted hometown as much as Junior Bonner does. Yeah.
Thank you for being with us today. Let's have a big hand out there for Stuart Rosebrook.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.